Have you seen me dice bag? The Grognard Files.
Hello, my name is Dirk the Dice, and this is the Grognard Files podcast, where we talk bobbins about tabletop RPGs from back in the day and today. I'm coming live from my den turned bunker in the northwest of England. I'm completely and utterly surrounded by my stuff. This year I've pledged to play a different post-apocalyptic game every month. So far I've played in the savage worlds of Ken Hite's Day After Ragnarok, a 1940s world of pulp adventure with a twist of Robert E. Howard, set in a Europe divided by the Midgard serpent, raised from the sea by malicious Nazis, its head blown to bits by Truman's nuclear weapon. I've also run the Morrow Project a couple of times, where the brightest and best emerge from a cryogenic slumber to rebuild humanity with the use of guns, science, and more guns. I've even dabbled with the so-called retro clone, whatever that means, Mutant Crawl Classics, a homage to one of the founding games of science fantasy role-playing, Gamma World, the subject of this podcast. Here on my right is my great library of RPGs and my Grognard Files. Here on my left is the ridiculous homemade shrine to the actor Caroline Munro. I'll just give it a tap. Ah, yes. She's appeared as Abby Church in the 2006 movie The Absence of Light. The special effects are a throwback to the 90s and the acting is rubbish. A science fiction horror movie about corporate corruption as rivals fight over the meaning of life itself. Its name suggests that it'll be a documentary about the power of film, narrated by Mark Cousins, a sort of essentialness of art. Instead, it's a load of bobbins. A disaster. Like many of my generation, I was preoccupied by the oncoming nuclear Armageddon. We're going to explore the context a little more in a future Grog Pod, because Gamma World never really felt like it was responding to that. Gamma World was more about adventuring with guns and having balmy encounters. The first edition was published in 1978 by TSR, who were at the height of their sudden growth. They were extending their product line, and Gamma World, created by Jim Ward, was a sequel to Metamorphosis Alpha. It wasn't really supported by the company until several years later, when there was a flurry of modules produced in 1981, which is surprising, given that it was a good seller, outstripping GDW's Traveller at the time. To understand the repertoire of post-apocalyptic games more, I've invited our very own Amiga Man into the room of role-playing rambling. Pookie, the prolific reviewer from the Reviews from Relier, looks at some of the prominent games set in the dark future. He's got an extensive library amassed over the years thanks to his forensic analysis of RPGs that he's captured on his site. There are over 1,000 reviews on Reviews from Relier, so he is well placed to help us understand post-apocalyptic RPGs. I've met many people over the past 5 years of podcasting, but one of the people who's become a real friend has provided this episode's first, last and everything. It's from Neil Benson, also known as the Old Scouse role player. He talks about the first time he played, the last time he played, and the game that means everything to him. Judge Blythe, our resident rules lawyer, faces the Games Master screen as we get all nostalgic about Gamma World and talk about some of our favourite features of the game. I'll be back at the end to mutate some new Patreon supporters. Until then, Ramblers, let's get rambling.
Open box!
Welcome to Open Box, the part of the show where we look backwards to look forwards. I'm in the room of role-playing rambling with Pookie, and we're going to look at post-apocalyptic games. But first of all, I need to ask the question I ask everybody to get an understanding of you, Pookie. What was the first game you played, and who did you play it with?
The very first game I played, it wasn't the first game I would have heard about. The first game I played was Dungeons & Dragons basic set. It would have been the Moldvay version, sort of 1981, with the Errol Oates cover, and that was with my family, and it was a disaster.
Right. And why was it a disaster?
Because I didn't know what I was doing. I would do it entirely differently these days if I could get my family to play, because they didn't like me gaming because it ruined part of my education.
Right. Oh, I see. So gaming has played a key part of your life from those early days then, and you've been a collector since then.
I didn't start out as a collector. It was more a case of, oh, look, a role-playing game. I want to have a look at that, and I want to play it. And there were all these fascinating games out there, and I kept adding to my collection, and then, it built and built, and so it's been piles of books, and now it's shelffuls full of books, and my partner kind of despairs of me bringing home a new game or a whole new bag full of books to review.
I imagine it's a treasure trove in there. We're going to delve in there a little bit, aren't we? To look at some of these post-apocalyptic games. I know that when we come to Birmingham for UK Games Expo, you very often act as a chaperone for me and Blythe, but you didn't always come from Birmingham.
No, I'm originally from Dorset, but I've lived in Birmingham for just over 20 years.
So when your family weren't happy playing with you, who were you playing with? Who was your gaming group back in the day?
When I started, I was the one who introduced role-playing to my grammar school. Then when I was going to my grammar school, I was travelling out to a local group, which is called Have Dice Will Travel, which is quite well known in the area, playing things like Against the Giants, The Drow, basically that kind of thing. And sort of like exploring other games as well. And then I had a local gaming group as well I could cycle to. So and then I moved on to another town and a group of friends, and I sort of moved on, and apart from a break at university, I was gaming in London for a few years and then up here in Birmingham.
And what was the repertoire of games that you were playing back then? Really
didn't actually do apart from one group, we didn't do a lot of D&D. We did a lot of other things. So I can remember gate games of Call of Cthulhu, the James Bond 007 role-playing game, which is an absolute delight. It's probably one of the best licensed role-playing games ever. I'm actually having the pleasure of gaming with the designer at the moment in a RuneQuest campaign.
Chris Klug, isn't it?
Yeah, and Pendragon, and anything that came out and that was new and sort of like, it was interesting. During the 90s, I was playing a lot of GURPS and Cyberpunk and Warhammer as well.
I've called you in, I've brought you into my bunker, socially isolated, to talk about post-apocalyptic games, because at the start of the year, I gave a commitment to play a different post-apocalyptic game every month, research it and look into it. What would you say was the first post-apocalyptic role-playing game?
Well, there are three candidates for that. Very first, but most people will say Metamorphosis Alpha, came out in 1978, and that's a post-apocalyptic game aboard a captive universe, aboard a great starship that you're exploring as Stone Age ex-crewmen or descendants of crewmen. And it's got that thing of the sort of the Gamma world setup of, pure strain humans, mutated animals, and so on. But really, if you look at the broad history of role-playing games, you go back to Tecumseh, Empire of the Petal Throne, because that does take place after an apocalypse, but sort of like tens of thousands of years after one. And on a planetary scale versus the limited but still huge space of the Warden in Metamorphosis Alpha. The other candidate, of course, is Gamma World, which came next after Metamorphosis Alpha, and that really transferred the concept to the Earth to the planet Earth.
Because it's true to say that it's not really a genre, is it? It's more of an aesthetic, isn't it? It's tropes that take part in a number of science fiction games, I would say.
Yeah, it's a very science fiction, but yes, there's a lot of different, very common elements to the genre. So, underground bunkers full of artifacts of the ancients. Once you have Mad Max, you have some elements of sort of like vehicles and vehicle combat. Gamma World gave us the idea of all the mutant creatures and basic mutants, mutant animals, mutant plants, and so on. And then, it's essentially you've got that, and then you've got the sort of like the technically military style games like Morrow Project and Twilight 2000.
Well, maybe we'll talk about those
Sure.
in a bit. Let's just focus on Gamma World, because we played Gamma World quite a bit, and the subject of the podcast is about Gamma World, because I had a very distinctive way of creating characters. Probably the first to use random tables.
But certainly one of the first, because essentially what you're rolling for in there, once you've rolled up your stats, it's rolling up for your mutations, physical and mental, and also your defects as well. And that sort of like begins to introduce the kind of weird and wacky elements of the setting, even before you start exploring. So you might be wandering around, a post-apocalyptic landscape, with two heads, wilderness, purple and green stripes, or spines, and or you might be, I don't know, a bear-like creature, but you've got wings and horns and so on.
I hadn't remembered that. It's actually the games master who's supposed to choose those defects as a sort of balancing to some of your beneficial mutations that you get.
Yeah, I mean, these days generally it's that's not seen as, okay. That is old school, because the players will look upon that as going, oh, you're going to punish me with this, thank you very much, rather than rolling the dice, and seeing what comes up and going, it's not me, it's not the GM that's punishing me, it's the game.
And the other thing I've discovered playing it is that really it's not suited for one shot. This is designed for campaign play, because, as you say, you're exploring, and in the first one, you just get a blank canvas of America for you to explore, and a lot of the book is made up of the games master populating the hexes.
Yes, I mean, it's probably one of the earliest sort of like hex crawl kind of games. The idea essentially that the game master sits down and creates a landscape for his players to explore, as you say. And in many of these games, there's sort of like an implicit suggestion that you create your the landscape outside your house.
Yes,
your local area. I mean, so Morrow Project does this with. It gives you, okay, here's America. Here's where all the nuclear weapons have hit. Here's 150 missiles that which you can have fun playing with and targeting specific areas.
Yeah, it does. That's right. The first section of the book is taken up by the missile effects, various locations in America, and where the targets are located, and the probable nature of the missiles that are likely to hit that area. So in Maryland, it looks like it's going to get hit by an SS-17.
I don't know. That's a good thing or a bad thing.
I think with the Morrow Project, though, it is an intriguing premise, isn't it? That Morrow has predicted a nuclear attack, and he's setting up this program with the industrialists in America to cryonically retain some people, the brightest and the best, in these bunkers to emerge after the disaster.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fantastic premise, but unfortunately, it's not something it quite really delivers effectively on in the core book. Certainly doesn't. It's something that it develops in later scenarios and supplements.
Have you ever played the Morrow Project?
I haven't. To be fair, last weekend was my first exposure to it. I've had a copy sat on the shelf for a while because I wanted to talk about it, and it's 40 years old. Obviously, the thing I do is I write reviews, and I went, okay, I do reviews that sort of like key into what came out 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and so on, which means I can organise what I review and when. Morrow Project is 40 years old. So yes, I hurriedly dug it out and read it and went, oh, a lot of people said, yeah, this is quite fascinating as sort of like a potential setting, but the execution is not as good as you would want it.
What I found, because obviously contrasting that with Gamma World, people take it very seriously. I played this the other night. I thought they were never going to leave the bunker. They were that cautious. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there's good reason for that, because essentially, people are sort of the characters are designed as sort of like generally real people, they're armed with real weapons. There's no weirdness or wackiness until they get outside. There's no that and the other intent of that course comes from really who designed it. Because like Twilight 2000, it's really designed by, of course, it's an American game, but basically ex-service men. They served in the American Armed Forces, or they served in the National Guard. Yeah, exactly. Like the writer of The Armory is also the author of Moral Project. So, and that came through also again in Twilight 2000, and a lot of people obviously at Game Designers Workshop. So you have sort of like a sort of like people with military experience writing sort of like those two role-playing games in particular.
There is a lot of concentration on the efficiency of weapons and the amount of damage that weapons do, because people can get eviscerated very easily by a submachine gun in the Moral Project. So, some entertaining, but
Yes.
it's not the fun I'd like to have. I like to have mutants.
Yes, absolutely. The mutants is basically, as I say, it's weird, it's wacky, and it's fun. It's not real in the sense of it's not an attempt on a simulation like Moral Project or Twilight 2000. But I mean, the thing is that essentially Moral Project is one of those role-playing games, post-apocalyptic role-playing games which is about leaving the bunker to go and explore. Most of them are about being out in the world and then finding these bunkers, which are you're essentially your equivalent to dungeons.
Yes. Yeah.
The one exception to that, in essence, is Paranoia. Which is a post-apocalyptic setting, but you're all in the bunker and you don't know what it's like outside until very much later on in the development of the game line. Go on, I'm going to say that's also weird and wacky in its own way because it's also a satire.
It's almost that sense that we had in playing the Moral Project, is that people didn't want to leave the security of the bunker because they didn't know what was beyond it. So it's kind of turning that up and dialing it up.
Yeah.
Just returning to Gamma World, because we spoke in January after we played the game, and what we talked about then was about how the different editions dealt with the apocalypse. We want to talk about that.
Yes, one of the things about the post-apocalyptic role-playing game is whenever a new one comes out, it kind of models or reflects contemporary fears about the disasters which could befall the world. So obviously, if you look at Gamma World and also Moral Project, of course, really, and Twilight 2000, it's nuclear war as the key means of destruction. We're of an age where we lived through the end of the nuclear age and can remember how fearful it was. You look at things like threats, and the air raid sirens. They would test. But as it moves on and technology changes, then it's beginning to adopt a new technology. So by the time you get to the 6th edition, I believe, is with from Swords and Sorcery Studio. That's taking into account of nanite swarms as well. And then you get to the 7th edition, and it's sort of like, by then it's bringing in AIs and they cause the war. And that's kind of reflected in sort of like one of the descendants of the Gamma World, which is Mutant Year Zero, where essentially, great titans, basically the AIs, fought a war. And, people were sort of like, caught in the crossfire.
In this, in the first edition, and I think it carry it into the second edition, it's the cause of the apocalypse is quite prescient, actually, because it predicts a time when there's a kind of social utopia and people are self-actualizing and no longer motivated by the things that would normally motivate them, and they become highly factionalized and have identity wars, and it's the identity wars that actually trigger the apocalypse. So
yeah, who'd have thought it 40 odd years ago that they would see it coming?
Yeah. And I think it's there is an alignment, isn't there, with science fiction at the time, because it's a bit of a 70s obsession, isn't it? The apocalypse and disaster, impending disaster.
Yeah, I mean, obviously in the earlier 70s, you've got all the disaster movies like Irwin Allen, but essentially the science fiction it does sort of like deal with the post-apocalyptic. So famously, although the novel dates from the 60s, there's Logan's Run, which is that being in a bunker, not being allowed out, and then going out to explore. I mean, not almost like Paranoia used that as a model. I mean, not in tone. And then you're looking at things like the most obvious post-apocalyptic exploration on film. Couple of films I would suggest: Damnation Alley. It's A Boy and His Dog, which stars a young Don Johnson with his telepathic dog.
There's also that trilogy of Charlton Heston films in the 70s of Soylent Green, Planet of the Apes, and Omega Man.
Planet of the Apes is a classic of the genre. Soylent Green also sort of like addresses sort of like the possibility of a coming apocalypse because of the situation. Yeah, it is surprising that sort of like that Charlton Heston did sort of like a bunch of science fiction films like that.
One game we haven't mentioned, and I've got my calculator ready, is Aftermath from Fantasy Games Unlimited.
If you were doing an apocalypse game where you wanted something really detailed, and again, it's one of those ones where you could take it and design the apocalypse you wanted with it. Yes. It's not on. Again, it's. I'm not saying it's not unplayable, but it's a game that demands your time.
And that's what struck me about it, because I always assumed that it was a nuclear post-apocalypse depicted in here. But you're quite right; it allows you to have any kind of disaster. A virus, heaven forbid, or it could be hyperinflation, even. Yeah, as that's causing it.
I believe there's an invasion by tripods, I think, or something like that.
Yeah, yes.
Alien invasion sort of thing.
It's notable for the number of flowcharts and the fact that it's got the stats for a bicycle. But I'm going to give it a go.
I wish you every success with that.
I'll invite you along.
You can, only as long as you're doing all the arithmetic.
So if you wanted to recapture that old school experience of post-apocalyptic fun, where would you start?
Two choices. The most obvious one is, actually three choices, because the Metamorphosis Alpha Collector's Edition is still available. And what's fantastic about that is you've not just got the original 32 pages of the original game in there, but you've got almost everything else that came out for it. In terms of, and there's interviews and discussions and more rules and, just extra stuff in there. And it's packed with a lot of gaming. But the most obvious one, if you were to do Gamma World, it would be Mutant Crawl Classics, which essentially is, I'll describe it, if Gamma World in the Gold Box edition was the 7th edition, that's essentially Gamma World 8th edition. Until Wizards of the Coast comes out with their own. But that does everything that you want in a Gamma World game, so you have pure strain humans, mutants, mutated animals, and plantians, and does it using the same mechanics as Dungeon Crawl Classics. Plus it's supported with, there's a whole load of adventures for it that sort of like explore some of the sort of like the genre callbacks. So there's one scenario which is essentially its take upon the Sean Connery in a nappy film Zardos, and there's another one which is basically not dissimilar to Accountant for Leibovitz, which is a good take upon the genre.
What has struck me from playing these games over the last few months is essentially it's a device, isn't it? It's a device to take that Ken Hite adage of start with Earth, wiping the slate clean.
Yes.
And it just gives you a gameable space to do that. And you can see it repeated, can't you, in different games?
Yes, I mean that's the thing. Basically, it's a world anew with callbacks to the past. The GM can put in there, and there will be things that are out there that are familiar. But you're really just going out and just finding out what's out there, what's new, and basically, if you're playing Gamma World, just having fun more than anything. Basically, getting yourself killed, handling some new artifact that's just electrocuted you. The other thing I would suggest people look at is a Swedish game called Mutant Year Zero, which really is the core book. There's 4 books. Each one deals with mutants, then mutated animals, then robots, then pure strain humans, and presents a campaign for each book. and then at the end of it, it brings all of them together in a new world together. So it's sort of like a prequel to sort of like the setup in Gamma World, but it's got its own sort of like a European character. The obvious thing is obviously that if you've got Mutant Core Classics, you've got everything you need to play. With Mutant Year Zero, you're buying one book at a time to get one element, one character type to play.
It's a gorgeous book,
yeah.
The Mutant Year Zero book. And I think I've not played it yet, but I'm going to give it a go in the next couple of months. It seems to strike a balance between the gonzo madcap Gamma World and the kind of dour Twilight 2000 moral project. It seems to walk the line between those.
Yeah, it's a much slightly drier tone, but it specifically sets it up so that you are exploring an area that the GM can populate. And it's also the other thing. It's got one thing that in cases many post-apocalyptic role-playing games don't necessarily have. Certainly in the core book is rules for developing your society.
Yes,
basically reconstructing what you've got to hand and making your world better.
And it would be remiss, and we would get brownie points knocked off us from our friends at the Smart Party if we didn't mention Earth Dawn.
No, exactly. That's not the only one in its genre, but essentially, I have read Ken Hite has said Earth Dawn is the Morrow Project done right.
Yeah.
Essentially, because you basically the horrors descend upon the world. Everyone goes into cairns and hides for sort of centuries, and then comes out when it's safe. And it's a fantasy setting rather than a science fiction setting. The other one that's similar is there's a role playing game from Grimalkin Games called Desolation, where magic goes crazy. And again, with that. You have a similar thing, a fear of technology, but the technology is magic.
That's a great trot through how RPGs have taught us everything we know about the apocalypse.
Hello. This is Neil Benson, aka Old Scouser Roleplaying on Twitter, and on my blog, oldscouserroleplaying.com. I've been invited by Dirk the Dice to talk about my first, last, and everything role-playing games. Before I start, I'd like to thank Dirk for the invitation. My first game is Tunnels and Trolls. It would have been 1983, the occasion of my 17th birthday, that triggered my interest in all things fantasy. Earlier in the day, myself and my mate Kev had been into town to watch The Return of the Jedi, and the day promised to be even more exciting as I was staying at his, as his parents were away. We had 2 videos to watch. His dad worked at Ford's and knew a guy who could get videos. The first was The Warriors, which was ace, and Bakshi's The Lord of the Rings. As much as I enjoyed The Warriors, I was entranced by The Lord of the Rings, revealing a world of magic, strange races, and heroic tales. Never before had I encountered such a thing. The next day, I mentioned it to my brother, who was really into military modelling, and he told me he'd read about a game called Dungeons and Dragons in one of his magazines. This game is supposed to be like The Lord of the Rings, he said, and pointed me to a Games of Liverpool advertisement in one of his magazines. With no idea what a game supposing to be like The Lord of the Rings could be, I ventured into the basement of Games of Liverpool for the first time. I told the chap behind the counter why I was there. He asked me if I had a group to play with. I didn't really understand what he meant, so I said no. Rather than D&D, he suggested I grab Tunnels and Trolls, as it supported solo play. Again, I didn't really know what he meant, but trusting to his expertise, I purchased the game, anxiously waiting to get home to see what I had bought. I don't really recall the details, but imagine I was somewhat bemused. A game with just a few books in the box. Still, I persisted, sensing that there was something to this role-playing thing and drawn in by Liz Danforth's amazing art. If I'm honest, I really struggled with the game. Some of the ideas sounded really cool, but I couldn't see how the game worked. My first and only attempt was Buffalo Castle, with myself as GM and Kev, being a good friend and patiently putting up with this nonsense, playing 6 characters I had prepared for him, handwritten onto index cards as suggested. We really tried to enjoy the game, but it just wasn't working. I reread it, but Kev had had enough. Then my mind turned back to my brother's original information, and I returned to Games of Liverpool with that lovely little orange-yellow box in hand, and traded it in for the basic Dungeons and Dragons rulebook. That made much more sense to me, but that was possibly because I'd read a little more about RPGs, having bought the iconic book What is Dungeons and Dragons, and perhaps a magazine or two. I've not played Tunnels and Trolls in the 35 plus years since, despite having the deluxe edition on my shelves. Fingers crossed, sometime soon I'll get a game. The last game I played is Barbarians of Lemuria. I returned to the hobby about 4 years ago and didn't really know where to begin, but I could see that the hobby had changed in the 20 years since I'd last played. I went through a load of different games, each seeming more exciting than the last. One game that really caught my eye was Simon Washburn's Barbarians of Lemuria. It harkened back to the swords and sorcery tales I had always enjoyed, came with its own setting, and had a light set of rules. When the game arrived, I flicked through it and put it on my shelves, where it would hibernate for a couple of years, as at that time I was being drawn into OSR gaming. Sometime in 2018, I picked the game up again and started reading it. Immediately, my imagination was caught by the weird fantasy setting, and I could see how the rules would give fast, exciting, heroic play, quite a contrast to the brutal OSR games I'd become used to running. I started working on a game to run at cons, and also in early 2019 started a fortnightly mini-campaign. In fact, my original intention had been to run the small adventures in the back of the book as unconnected tales. But when the players came up with interesting background details for their characters' boons and flaws, I started to see how I could put something bigger together, bringing in elements the players gave me and some of the adventure seeds from the book. Inspired by how Orlanth Rex ran his RuneQuest campaign, which I'd been lucky enough to play in, I tried to apply the same approach to Barbarians of Lemuria, and it's worked a treat. We finished the first season and have recently restarted, with me keeping just one step ahead of the players in knowing what comes next. This is a game I can't recommend highly enough, especially now it has more support, with the Lemurian Legends Adventure Book and the Lemurian Chronicles Sourcebook, which adds new setting information, fantastic adventures, and has the best cover of all the books in my collection. For my everything game, well, like some previous contributors, I've bent the rules slightly. I really can't tie this down to one system, so I'm going to say D&D Retro Clones. Back in 2016, when I was exploring the new RPG landscape, I looked at modern rules, narrative games, 2nd, 3rd, 4th and 5th editions of D&D, as well as everything in between. But I found myself drawn to the old D&D games that I'd enjoyed so much back in the day. The thing is that while I love these old systems, I'm rarely happy with them. There's always something that niggles, so I'm always exploring, always looking for that perfect retro clone. I started with Basic Fantasy, which is a great mashup of 3.5 and Basic Expert D&D, and is completely free and very cheap in print, and then moved on to the clever but flawed The Hero's Journey. My next stop was Lamentations of the Flame Princess, which is a fantastic system, but has some controversial content. I have to say, I've had nothing but amazing games with it. I've also dabbled with Dungeon Crawl Classics, although some would claim that it's barely a retro clone, and the Black Hack, which is definitely not a retro clone, but is old school D&D with modern rules. That has led me by a circuitous route to the one game that nails it for me, and which I'm currently running, Old School Essentials. A reworking of Moldvay Basic Expert D&D. It has its flaws, but its brilliant organisation just works at the table and allows you to tap into all those old TSR modules as well as a whole raft of brilliant OSR content. However, my journey of discovery continues. So there we are, my first, last and everything role-playing games. Thanks for listening. I look forward to hearing your first, last and everythings when it's your turn, if you've not already done so, and hope to catch up with you all at some point, even virtually, while all this coronavirus stuff is going on. Bye for now.
Hi, I'm DM Mike.
And I'm DM Liz.
We're from the Save for Half podcast,
And you're listening to the Grognard Files.
where Judge Blythe is wrong.
No, he's not.
Games Master Screen! Welcome to the room of role-playing rambling in our self-isolating bunkers. I've got Blythe with me. Hello, Blythe.
Hello, Dirk.
How's life in your isolated bunker?
Well, yeah, it's isolating.
Well, I've tried to make the best of it. I've got myself some Elvis juice. I've got some unspecified savoury snack.
Are you product placement? What's going on here? You're not specifying the snack, but you will specify the beer. We got some kind of deal going on here that we don't know about.
It's one of those from Aldi where cardboard squares. With
the cheaper end of the crisp market.
Yeah,
I had some like that the other day. They weren't Pringles. They were like an imitation Pringle. They did taste like cheese and onion cardboard.
I'm going to treat myself as well because I'm in isolation. I'm going to spark up my Goop candle.
What are you talking about? What's a Goop candle?
My Gwyneth Paltrow candle. I've been saving it for a special occasion. Now's the moment.
Does it have a particular fragrance?
Yeah, I got it from the market. I don't think it's the real thing. But anyway, I don't know about you, Blythe, but when it came to Gamma World, I did have that pang of nostalgia. You know, that seductive feeling of nostalgia in a way that we haven't done for a while.
Yes, yeah. Well, it was one of the early games, wasn't it? I think it was probably about the fourth, fifth game we bought.
Yeah,
between us.
Well, I think it will remind people of the Prime Directive. So we weren't allowed to buy games that each other had. So
if you bought the game, you ran the game, but that meant that other people couldn't buy it because the games master owned it. Yeah.
And so in your repertoire at this time, when we started with Gamma World, you had Stormbringer, Traveller, and Dragon Quest.
Correct.
And you got Gamma World.
I did, yeah.
And what drew you towards that?
It's hard to say, isn't it, really? I think part of it was the hankering to play a variant of D&D. Because Simon had D&D, didn't he? He had advanced D&D. Gamma World seemed like a form of D&D, but a science fiction, science fantasy form of D&D. At least on the face of it, that's what it. I think we may see that it's not like that at all, but that's what it felt like. So it seemed. I think I spent a lot of time as a budding lawyer trying to find a legal loophole to get my hands on D&D without breaking the loophole. And there was basic D&D, which I did get later, and as I think we've said, actually basic and expert D&D is a very good little game, actually. But at the time, that felt like, it's no good because you want advanced D&D, don't you? You don't want basic, you want advanced. So Gamma World felt like a way around that, I think. That was part of the attraction, trying to get round the Prime Directive.
Because it didn't really have any prominence. I remember some of the adverts that were in White Dwarf, but it never featured in White Dwarf, did it, for example? And I'm not sure that Games Workshop stocked it. So I think we mentioned before, we used to get our games. You got Stormbringer from Forbidden Planet in London.
Yeah.
You got Traveller from Games Workshop, and you got Dragon Quest from Northern Games Day.
Yeah, that's right.
But Gamma World was a bit more unusual, wasn't it? Because you got that from Beatties.
You got that from Beatties, which was a toy and model shop in Manchester, wasn't it? That had a little bit of an RPG section, which it did sell a lot of odd stuff, didn't it?
Yes.
I'd love to know now who's behind stocking that stuff in the shop, because there was some odd stuff in there, wasn't there? You know, bits and pieces that you couldn't get anywhere else, or you'd never seen anywhere else in some cases.
Yeah, they used to have miniatures that you never saw anywhere. They used to bring over the Royal Partha ones, didn't they? That you didn't really see.
Right.
Yeah,
you didn't see them. Yeah. No, I did get it from there, and it was. I think on the face of it, when I bought it, we didn't know much about it, and it was a bit of an oddity because I think I had the second edition, which was the kind of golden box, and the front cover of it was very kind of flamboyant. And although this was the 80s, very flamboyant 70s style illustration, I think, of people with ray guns and stuff, which looked a very kind of comic book science fantasy. But the original, the first edition that we'd seen advertised in White Dwarf, it has the guys looking at the ruined building, doesn't it? The ruined tower block.
Yeah.
And that looks very, very post-apocalyptic. It doesn't look like science fantasy at all, does it? Very different covers, covers on the. So it was hard to know what to make of it. What was it? Was it some kind of slightly hard-edged science fiction game, or was it something with talking rabbits?
You see, and it's true to say, isn't it, that in our group, but when I say group, that was me, you, and Simon, wasn't it, playing?
At that stage, yeah, Eddie hadn't appeared on the scene then, so group, as in three of us, yeah.
Enthusiasm was mixed, wasn't it? Because I was really keen to play it because of Starburst. I was really into Mad Max. I don't think I'd seen it at the time, but I had the cutout of Starburst, Mad Max on my wall, and I was into Car Wars, although I could never get it to work properly. And I had a sense of that post-apocalyptic thing, and I was desperate to play this, but that enthusiasm wasn't shared by Simon. And to some extent, even though you were running it, I don't think you were wholly convinced by it, were you?
No, I don't think I was. I mean, it is, at one level, it is a silly game. It is silly because it's a kind of post-apocalyptic future, which is, I think it's fairly strongly implied in the rules that it's a nuclear war. And
it is a nuclear war.
Nuclear war, yeah.
But it's much later than the 20th century where it kind of happens. But
it's a post-nuclear war world. It does have talking rabbits and talking badgers and stuff that seems a bit daft, I think. And I remember feeling slightly disappointed at the time and wanting to make it work, but I was never completely convinced. You know, it's like Watership Down with ray guns. Like, what's this? You know, it just doesn't, at the time. And I think we're probably guilty, we've discussed it before, probably guilty of all being a bit poor-faced about our role-playing as well. So, you know, we had RuneQuest, which is a kind of world in itself with all kinds of cults and structures and societies and a history and stuff. But it has a kind of credibility to it, I think. In the same way that Traveller Universe has a credibility to it as well. But then Gamma World, you just think, oh God, you know.
But isn't
it's a bit silly.
Isn't it odd? Because I know that leading up to this podcast, we were kind of exchanging views on it. And I could remember quite a lot about the Cleansing War of Garrick Blackhand, which you ran as a campaign. We played it for a while, didn't we? And I remembered quite a bit of it because in my imagination, I loved it, even though nobody else did around the table.
I think the opinion of it's changed now. I don't mind it now, but I think part of it was there's that problem, isn't there, as well? When, all right, I had mixed feelings on it, but Simon just didn't really like it, and it's difficult to run a game and enjoy a game when one of your players or several of your players don't like it. Aren't enthusiastic about it. It's very difficult then, isn't it? And in those days, of course, we couldn't find other players. So you were stuck to appeasing. You were stuck to trying to find something that would appeal to the two people who had as players in the same way that you were. You know, you had to appeal to both players because if you didn't, literally 50% of your players weren't really engaging with it. And I think that was part of the problem. He thought it was a bit daft, a bit silly, maybe a bit beneath him. I don't know. Why am I playing a game with talking rabbits when I can play RuneQuest and be a Orlanth Rune Lord?
And speak to a talking duck.
Well, yeah, that's a good example, isn't it? Of in the world of Orlanth, you've got talking ducks, but it's explained in a kind of credible way that they're cursed by the gods, these cursed men or cursed ducks. Somehow works. Whereas if you say, well, there's been a nuclear war, and you know what literally the fallout of that nuclear war is? Talking rabbits. Oh, is it? All right. I'm not really buying that. You see, with Grolantha, you buy it because it's a fantasy world, isn't it? It's the gods and magic. But what Gamma World's doing is it's saying there's been a nuclear war. And at the time, and even now, you're thinking, I don't think let's hope we never find out, but I don't think a nuclear war would result in talking rabbits and talking badgers. I don't think it would. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an expert on these matters, but I think it'd be a lot bleaker than that.
It's interesting you say that about Simon as well, because you're right. At that time, obviously, I was hooked and I would have played anything. And it's strange, isn't it? Now at our age, early 50s, thinking back why we tolerated such bad behaviour at the age of 13. But we really needed to keep the ball in the air, didn't we? We really needed him to play, because otherwise it could have jeopardised everything. So
otherwise it was just me and you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, which we did on occasion. A lot of the time, it was just me. But having that extra player, you've kind of had a hold over us. So, a game that it wasn't possible to say, okay, Dirk likes Gamma World, and I have mixed feelings, but I'm okay with it. I'll play it. Maybe we'll find some other players to play it. But you couldn't do that.
No,
you couldn't do it.
But I remember that tone, because as I say, I was into it, and I remember that tone of mocking and kind of cruel mocking as well, as it was directed at you, not at the game, right from the very beginning. So it's set in Gelstone Park, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah. There's a cat called Taifu Baru. There's a talking cat, Taifu Baru, named after tea bags. So insult to injury, named after a tea bag.
Yeah. And every time that was mentioned, that was ridiculed. Every time Gelstone Park it was like smarter than the average bear, hey, boo-boo, wasn't it? All that stuff.
Yeah, it was.
It never really got going, did it? But I really wanted it to work.
Yeah, and I think I would have let it work, but like I say, you're just thinking, oh well, half your audience here isn't really buying it, so it's doomed in a way, And it's odd because we've played it again and really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I don't think it's not as poor face now, are we? It's fun. It's it is silly in a sense, but
I think it's recognising that there's intrinsically lots of fun things built in there, and it's more innovative than you anticipate, isn't it? You take some of the things that you take for granted, really good ideas, and we'll perhaps explore that when we look at the tables. But I really had fun playing it, and I do feel a sense that I could run a campaign of it. I would enjoy it.
There you go. The goal has been thrown down.
I would enjoy it. I would enjoy it. I would.
Yeah, I think I would. Yeah, no.
Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to erect this Games Master screen between us, so I can hide the secrets of my tables, my many tables.
Yes.
And I think we should leave our 13-year-old selves back in the 80s and try and have a look at these rules anew and trying to assess them with our Grognardian eyes. Okay, are you ready?
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, this candle's getting at me. So here we go.
I'm going to faint with the fumes.
I think so. Hang on, here we go. Are you ready? And that is a 38. 38. And that is compatibility. It's mentioned in the AD&D Dungeon
It
Master's
is,
Guide.
yeah.
That can,
Yeah, Magic and Mutants or something like that. I think it says something like that. It is. I mean, it's a very similar system. So it uses descending armor class. Yeah.
yeah. So as
It's
your armor
very
class,
sim-
as your armor class gets better,
yeah.
the number gets lower, which is
So that's it. So the armor class, it gives a table, a very, very useful table that says things like if your armor class is 5 in D&D, it's 5 in Gamma World, and if it's 3 in D&D, it's 3 in Gamma World. That's a very useful table. That spelt out, line by line. So they're essentially the same. I think that the difference, the big difference is there aren't really character classes and levels in Gamma World, are there?
no.
At least not in the early versions. I think I might be right in saying I think later ones started to develop, but certainly the one we played didn't have things like that. So there's humans, there's mutants, and there's kind of animal hybrid types, and there are 3 races you can pick.
Yeah, so
which sort of serve as classes, but they're not classes, and they don't have levels and that kind of thing going on. You pretty much generate your character as generated and play them rather than go up the levels or anything like that.
Yeah, so there's pure humans, which there doesn't seem to be much benefit to being a pure human other than it gives you certain access into some security levels, and robots treat you differently. Because they're programmed, because it's based on Asimov, isn't it? They're not, the robots are not allowed to harm pure humans, so that gives you some advantages. But the real benefit is to have mutations, which perhaps we'll talk about.
Yeah, well, so you do look at it and you wonder why someone would ever play a human, because even with some of the mutations, you can still look like a human. They're not all physical mutations, and therefore you still get all the benefits of being a human, can't you? But in terms of crossover with D&D, it's a pretty similar game in many respects, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's a contemporary of the Dungeon Master's Guide, and I think looking at it, you realise, because I think we said in episode 6 about how crazy the Dungeon Master's Guide was in terms of, what you're supposed to do with it, where you're supposed to start. There's such a hodgepodge of ideas and thrown around. Whereas I think this first edition Gamma World rules is reasonably well organised for...
Yeah, it's quite a tight system of rules. It doesn't waffle on too much, does it?
No. And it gives you all the elements of Dungeon Master's Guide, such as random generation of new environment, encounters, devising encounters, all those kind of things that are in Dungeon Master's Guide. But it presents them in a more concise and interesting way, compelling way of, you can do something with this. Yeah.
Very similar game. I think there's things like weapon classes, isn't there? So the to hit roll is governed as rather than in D&D where it's your level, because it doesn't have things like levels. You have weapon classes, don't you?
I wonder. I mean, we never did it, but I wonder if people did. Parachuting mutants from Gamma World into the
time travel. Yeah, something interdimensional travel.
Yeah. Having characters shooting a blue dragon with a ray gun and stuff like that.
Yeah. I suppose the only thing it's not compatible with is hit points is a bit odd, because in Gamma World you roll a d6 for every point of Constitution, don't you?
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas in D&D you think, well, yeah, you could start with relatively low hit points. It's a bit odd.
So how does it handle that in the conversion?
I'm not sure it does.
Right.
I'm not sure it does handle it, to be honest, particularly well.
Let's go back to the table. Okay, that is 15. 15. And if I go down the table, that's artifacts. Artifacts.
Mm.
So part of the core activity in Gamma World is exploring the world and recovering stuff, isn't it? Going around trying to find stuff. And that's how you enhance your character, by finding things that have a usage for you And that's how you develop your character, by finding more stuff. And it has quite a novel way of dealing with how you find out how that stuff works. So rather than a simple roll to say, yes, I know, an evaluate treasure roll, for example, I know what this is. It has a mini game, and depending on the complexity of the artifact, you can have a mini game, which is a bit like snakes and ladders, which means that you can move around the board, and it could blow up in your face and hurt you badly. Or, it could frustrate you by sending you round and round in a circle till eventually you calculate what it is. And we used this in the game, didn't we, that we ran recently?
Yeah, it is. It's like a flow chart. If you roll dice and it takes you down a particular avenue, roll another dice, it'll take you in the right direction or the wrong direction to work out what the artifact is. It's sort of interesting, really, because it touches on a thing that's quite common in more modern role-playing games, which is kind of extended tasks, isn't it? So a lot of games have things that are, rolling sets of dice to complete a task, to complete a set of things or work something out. And I suppose it's touching on that, isn't it? Like an extended task of rolling dice to work something out rather than one roll to say, yeah, you know what it is, no, you don't. It's sort of that kind of thing, which you see in games like 2D20 Star Trek has an extended task. I think New Savage Worlds has an extended task rules, doesn't it, as well? It's actually quite innovative for its time, doesn't it? I can't think of any other games that do that. No game we encountered did anything like that.
It is quite amusing to slap the honeycomb hexes with arrows pointing this way and that, and skull and crossbones hand-drawn.
They're like kind of weird flow charts. They're like circuit boards, don't they? It's a diagram of a circuit board with lots of different shapes and lines going in different directions, yeah.
And people feel strongly, don't they, either for or against mini game. But you're right, it doesn't feel like a mini game. It does feel like that extended task, doesn't it? It feels like that.
Yeah.
Can we push it even further? Shall we go a stage further? If we go, it might blow up in our face if this continues. Yeah.
I mean, I suppose on the downside, something like that is you do wonder if you've played the game a lot, whether you'd suddenly go, oh God, not this again.
Yes.
Do we have to play Snakes and Ladders in the middle of this game?
Part of the pleasure as well is discovering things that have been left behind by the ancients, i.e. people from the 20th and the 21st century, 22nd century, and trying to make them out. And this is done in a more comical way, I think, than perhaps Numenera does the same thing, doesn't it? That these ancient civilizations are left behind things that seem odd but useful to the thing.
Yeah.
So I've got a list from the back of Gamma. I'll read you some if that's all right. Yeah.
Yes, you do. Please do.
Okay. A ballpoint pen, good condition. Slot machine, excellent condition. A pleasure globe, excellent condition. When grasped firmly, gives the holder pleasurable sensations.
You like that candle of yours.
Attaché case, poor condition. The locks are rusted shut. Contains insurance papers.
Sounds like eBay, this. It's eBay you're reading these from, or the Gamma World?
A microwave oven, fair condition.
The Generation game.
Yeah.
Microwave oven. Cuddly toy.
A cuddly toy, yeah. I guess when I looked at these Generation games, what I thought, because they are like 70s consumer goods, like a donut maker and that kind of thing.
Well, because that's the thing, isn't it? It kind of it's the Holocaust, the atom bombs started dropping, not in our era in Gamma World, at some point in the future, but all that's left is stuff from our world.
Yeah.
We have to do the flow chart to work out how the ballpoint pen works. That'd be disappointing, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Half the evening rolling on that thing, I'd go, it's a ballpoint pen. Oh.
It is in good condition. Right, let's go.
Condition.
Let's go next. Okay, and it is 28, and that's mutations.
Oh, right, yeah. Mutations.
You're introducing mutations.
I will. Yeah, well, I mean, what you said earlier, you can be a pure strain human, but I don't know why you would want to be. Where's the fun in that? There's no fun in it, is there? You just be like a set of statistics with no abilities or anything. Well, you can be a mutant or an animal kind of mutant, can't you? And I think you roll a d4, don't you, to work out how many physical and mental mutations you've got. And I think what's sort of interesting as well is they're not all good mutations, are they? Some of them can be negative things as well, can't they?
Yeah,
like poor vision or a poor kind of body structure and that kind of thing.
Well, some of these they do vary, don't they, between like the sublime to the ridiculous, don't they?
Yes, some of them are kind of border on game breaking, don't they? Some of them are essentially magic. There's one called there's a telekinetic flight. It's just flight, isn't it? I mean, come on. I do remember when we played it though, being very reluctant to allow you to be mutants.
Yeah, you did. I'm pretty sure that we played pure strain humans.
And I think this is why, because when you read them, if you roll well, if you roll four mutations and you roll well, you can become quite powerful in ways that back in the day didn't seem like you'd earned it, if you know what I mean. There was very much a sense in all games, wasn't there, of start off relatively low power, work your way up and earn power. But in this game, you could roll a character who's very powerful, but you could also roll a character who's a bit rubbish.
Yeah,
and that's how it was. You were stuck that way.
I think
I like it now. Now it seems like fun. But I think then it didn't feel like fun. It seemed a bit game break, and it felt. I think when I was running it, I looked at some of them and thought, "Oh wow, should I let them be Should we let them be mutants? I don't know. It seems like could be a bad idea if they got hold of these kind of powers, particularly when one of the players is a little bit doesn't like it and is going to be perhaps disruptive. And he's got the power of flight and
a Death Star.
The Death Star and things like that. The last thing you want, isn't it?
I do think that the way that it deals with mental mutations and mental attacks is good in the way that AD&D wasn't.
It does deal with it quite well, but it still has that thing of. I mean, there's one mutation, time field manipulation, where you can send things backwards and forwards in time, and to send something back 5 years in time is a 75% chance of success. And you start looking at that and think that could create all sorts of problems, couldn't it? In some ways, it's a bit like create a character and roll randomly on all the spells in the player's handbook, and whatever you get, whether it's 9th level, 1st level, 5th level, doesn't matter. Get 4 of these, 3 of these.
To be fair to it, though, it does give you the option to choose, doesn't it? It does say in the character creation that you do have the option to choose, but then the DM has do the hindrances. So there's like a bit of a balancing act between.
Yeah.
That if you're choosing stuff, then the games master has the right to say, well, you've got this negative mutation to offset it. You can handle some of those game breaky things, can't you? So
yes,
I think in the game that we ran, one of the characters could teleport to 15 kilometres away, couldn't they? So he chose to teleport himself to the celebratory homecoming back at the base, where while you were finishing off the final battle with the boss monster. Okay, let's roll again. Okay, I've got 34, and that's robots. I want to talk about robots, but I also want to talk about antagonists in Gamma World, because in general, normally when I pick up a new game, as I've said before, I go straight to the bestiary to try and work out what kind of monsters you're going to deal with, what kind of...
Yeah.
As a games master, what are you going to have in your palette of colours to put towards encounters. And I think there are some interesting. We've kind of joked about them, haven't we? Like the hoops, who are the mutant rabbits.
Mutant rabbits, and the badders are there, the badgers. The
badgers.
I mean, I have an aversion to giant badgers anyway, but talking giant badgers, it's a step too. That is a step too far.
And you've got the sleeth, who are like lizards, and arcs, who are dog-like humanoids. So the actual depiction of the races, when you encounter it again, you realise that actually there's a bit more to them, a bit more interesting. Hoops, for example, I didn't realise at the time, but they have this mutation that allows them to turn metal into rubber.
Not only are the giant rabbits, they got the ability to turn things into rubber. Of course.
It sounds like you got a problem with this.
Yeah, I don't know. We come back to that thing. I don't have a problem now, but I think I did then.
In the game that we've recently played, a laser gun was turned into rubber and an axe turned into rubber, and you donated them to the local nursery, I think, at the end.
In the hope they wouldn't turn back into real ones so later date. The effect wears off. The kids at the settlement have got an actual laser gun.
But I want to talk about robots in particular because I think they handles robots really well. So, as we've intimated previously, civilization has advanced further than we have in the 20th and 21st century.
Yeah.
So, robots are part of everyday life before the actual disaster and catastrophe that brings about the nuclear war. So there's still these robots hanging around, so warbots, medbots, cargo bots, who are adversaries, encounters that you might do. And I think it deals with them really well in a way that, when you compare it to Traveller that came out at the time, it didn't give you anything about robots, did it? But this... No,
it never. It didn't mention robots at all in the core rule, which is weird when you think people have got faster than light ships, and yet no one's got a robot at all. It's a bit odd. Yeah.
And I think for bestiary, as soon as you start reading that, even that first edition, it fires up your imagination of thinking of how you could use these robots. And indeed, the first one, so GW1, Legion of Gold, is all about these Centurion robots who are hell-bent on attacking a settlement known as Horn, and it was developed, Gary Gygax, one of the developers of it. And you just think, this is really interesting, who can control these robots, who can you can get the better of them and apply them in interesting ways. So I do think that the robots, as they're developed in Gamma World, they're pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's just some of the other monsters, isn't it? That are, like you say, talking animals and stuff like that.
You didn't get past the
but that said, well, you said you need to get past it, but
I used to have a problem with it because my mum is trained as a nursery nurse. It all comes back to your mother, doesn't it? But she was taught as a nursery nurse that you should never have anthropomorphic animals. You should never show animals depicted in clothes and speaking. And so I was never read to me Beatrix Potter.
No, I never read to me, but I remember reading to my kids. It's a terrible thing, terrible books. Terrible. But that's the thing with Gamma World, it turned into Jeremy Fisher and Mrs. Tiggerwinkle with a ray gun. I'm having it. And some of the illustrations in the rule books made them look daft.
Yeah.
There is a picture of the hoops, I think, isn't there? In there. And they do look like daft watership down rabbits with guns, and you just think, stupid idea. Yeah. But I think the picture you used in the game we had online made them look more like that weird rabbit from Donnie Darko with a gun, and that was a bit scary and a bit weird. Like, oh wow, no, I kind of believe in. And I think you come back to that problem with science fiction, don't you? In as much as you've always got that problem of describing how things look. What does it look like? Here's a spaceship. Yeah, well, what does it look like? Is it a white, shiny spaceship? Is it a grey, crummy kind of looking spaceship? You know, there's a world of difference, isn't there, between the Starship Enterprise and the Millennium Falcon. They're both spaceships, but they're very different. So it's how you describe things in science fiction or science fantasy settings. The talking, walking, mutated animals in Gamma World suffer from that problem. That when you see the raccoon in Guardians of the Galaxy on the big screen, you think, oh yeah, that's like I see. It's like a raccoon that's been experimented on, and it can talk, and oh yeah, it's kind of plausible. It looks good, you know. But it's all about visualizing it, isn't it, correctly? And giving the impression to the players of what it's really like. You know, it's not Peter Rabbit with a spear. It's this weird mutated rabbit that almost probably doesn't even look like a rabbit that you would recognise. There's a world of difference in there, and that is a problem with how you put that into players' minds, I think.
Yeah,
you know, and
the
risk of people seeing it as slightly ridiculous versus something more sinister, you know. But it's a tough ask for a games master to do that, I think. And certainly when I was 13, it was a tough ask to kind of portray things like that.
Yeah. Okay, let's roll again.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oh, it's a straight 9, and it's hex crawl.
Hex crawls. Well, Gamma World that's the very essence of Gamma World, isn't it? It is a hex crawl game. That the idea is you have a map and explore different bits of it, don't you?
As Pookie said in the interview, this was taking Metamorphosis Alpha out of the spaceship and into a mutated world. Yeah. And it gives you, as a games master, the ability to populate it. Again, going back to the point we were making about Dungeon Master's Guide, I feel that it does it a lot better. Populating the hexes is a lot more interesting in this than the random dungeon, for example.
It feels kind of should be relatively easy to put together a dungeon, whereas I suppose with Gamma World, because it is a bit strange and a bit different as a game, certainly back in the day would have felt very different, did feel very different. Having that random generation of things is a little bit more useful, I think, in this game than in Dungeon Master's Guide. It feels ridiculous because you think, come on, we can all think, surely you can think of a dungeon with some goblins in and some orcs and a monster here and there. But in Gamma World, it's very different, isn't it? Because I suppose, probably not now, but back then you would have thought, well, what do I populate this world with? What should be there? And the random tables help, I think. And I suppose give you a game that you can sort of improvise to some extent, can't you?
Yes. Yeah. So if people go into a particular direction, you can quite quickly build up the world around it, can't you? Yeah.
Yeah. I suppose in a way it's kind of early world building thing, isn't it? Really.
What I found, because I've run it as one shot, it's not really suitable as a one shot. I think a lot of these post-apocalyptic games, by their very nature, are meant for going out into the world, exploring and rebuilding society. That seems to be the motif. And that hex crawl element of it is part of it, isn't it? I think that's why I'm leaning towards thinking, well, I could do this over 4 or 5 sessions and make it more interesting than trying to get a quick resolution in a one shot.
And I suppose it would, you're right. I suppose it would be more interesting because in a post-apocalyptic world, part of the fun is a post-apocalyptic world fun. I suppose it's more fun than the actual apocalypse, but anyway.
We'll soon find out, won't we?
We're on our way there, we'll find out. Yeah, you're right. But I suppose the fun of a post-apocalyptic game is survival and, as you say, rebuilding things and having settlements and that kind of thing. which does lend itself more to a campaign rather than a one-shot. You're right.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to roll for the last time. Okay, and that's 49. 49 is about the cryptic alliances.
Oh, yeah.
I think when I've come back to the game, this is the element that really caught my imagination. The idea that there are a group of different factions that populate Gamma World that have different motivations, different characteristics, and different secret signs that differentiate them from each other. So it provides some of them in the book. For example, the ranks of the fit, who are otherwise known as the Bonapartists, because they're founded by Emperor Napoleon I, a mutated bear with delusions of time and place.
Yeah, one step away from Beatrix Potter there.
You didn't get away from this. I think this.
Well, come on, it's probably like, I bet somewhere there's probably a manuscript, Beatrix Potter's unfinished book, Bonaparte the Bear.
I did, and you'll remember this from the scenario that we played, the Knights of Genetic Purity.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, who were a sort of, they're probably Nazis, aren't they?
Kind of far right Ku Klux Klan types, aren't they?
Yeah, trying to eradicate.
That kind of secret society is essential in any game with mutants, isn't it? That's a classic thing, that there's always any world that involves mutants, there's always purists, isn't there, out there trying to do them down.
The followers of the voice, who are the programmers, and they believe that the world was created by computers, and they find them in ruined installations and trying to revive them. And what I love about these in the second edition, they're represented by the symbol of a floppy disk, a 5-inch floppy disk.
Yes, which might explain the apocalypse. Maybe somebody tried to use one of those.
So I think there's life in this game. I do. I think
Convert. After all these years, you're getting a chance to
do it.
Resuscitate it, bring it back.
Yeah, I
You
think
better contact Simon, ask him if he wants to play, see if he's changed his mind. Yeah, come on, Simon, come down and play. You have to play a bear with a Napoleon hat on. There you go, and not be disparaging.
Something tells me that I still need to do a bit of work on you. Right.
No, you don't. I'm an addict. I would play anything. That's the problem. I would deal with the bear with a Napoleon hat on. The bear who thinks he's Napoleon.
Right. I'm going to blow this candle out before I fall over.
Yeah, I can see it's having an effect on you. Don't. So in fact, don't use it all at once. Don't use it all in one sitting. Save it. Save some of it for, you're going to be in isolation for a long time. Save Gwyneth's candle. Make you should probably order another one. Can you order another one online? I don't know. How easy to get hold of?
I don't know. This knockoff version, quite a few of them. There's a light that never goes out. All right, Blythe. See you later.
See ya.
Thank you to Pookie for the interview. There's an extended version of it, which will be available soon on the Grognard Files YouTube channel. It was streamed live as part of Virtual Grogmeet, a weekend of games that was held in April 2020. It was bigger than ever, 35 games over the weekend with over 100 people signed up. Thanks to everyone who took part in the event. Gamma World First Edition is readily available for a relatively low price on Drive-Thru RPG. I don't get anything for recommending that route, but if you want to get a general idea of the game, it's a better option than the secondary sales that seem to insist on inflated prices. The early modules are available too, which are intelligently written and give ideas on how to get the best out of the setting. When I've been playing Gamma World, I've pepped up the game by adding elements from The King of Dungeons, Baz Stevens' stripped-down version of the 13th Age. It allows your vintage car to be souped up with new technology. It brings along advantage, disadvantage dice, escalation dice and bonds as a group penny, but more importantly, you can create your cryptic alliance as a guild for group roles and extra shenanigans. Also, the ability to montage journeys is entertaining in Gamma World One Shot too. You can get King of Dungeons on drive-thru too. Over on Patreon, I've revived the monthly newsletter of recommendations and news and views from the den down the back of the settee. This month it will contain details of an online monthly one-shot club which will be open for business on the last Sunday of each month. The first one is hosted by Judge Blythe himself. We have a Patreon campaign to support the podcast and to encourage us to keep going. We've had some new and returning supporters in March, so here's a thanks to them. Pulling up a comfy armchair is Kevin Thorpe, William Gosline, Peter Nowakowski, Brian Parker. Adding a fancy poof to the comfy armchair is David Summers, Wayne Peters, Ian Cooper. At the sofa so good level, I like to roll on a table relevant to the game being discussed and give them a virtual gift. This time I'm going to give them a mutation from Gamma World. So first up is Michael Cool from the podcast Improvised Radio Theatre with Dice. And he gets 45 multiple body parts. I'm sure you can have lots of fun with this one. But it's a family show, and I know that Mike is a keen RuneQuest player, so I'm going to roll the location on D20. Oh, not an extra left leg, but a 20 and an extra head. Andy Hemming, a fellow Boltonian who has now defected to Yorkshire, and we played Gamma World together at Virtual Grogmeet. He doesn't need to roll because he's already Alia Acton with photosynthetic skin. A jolly green giant. Ho, ho, ho. Paul Greenhouse gets 8. That's a death field generation. Ouch, that's a permanent social distancing with menace. Okay, next up is Cameron Orwin. And he gets 74. Shorter. Makes him difficult to hit, but with a reduced metabolic rate. Speak to me, the referee, to determine the effects. I'm sure we'll come up with something for that. James Summerson. 75. And we just had a 74. There's something wrong with this algorithm. It's like roll 20. But that's pyrokinesis. He's a fire starter. A twisted fire starter. And finally, last but not least, it's Bud Wright. Welcome back, Bud. You have 46. Illusion Generation, which is a cool mutation. In a recent Mutant Crawl Classics game, an image of Godzilla was projected in front of scared tribespeople. Great stuff. Thank you to all of the Patreon supporters. We'll be looking at post-apocalyptic games again very soon. But next time, we'll be looking at the chronicler of the pre-apocalypse, Jack Vance, whose series of novels from Dying Earth to Lyonesse have had a lasting influence on fantasy role-playing games. Until then, adios amigos.
That's my shtick, you got it.
Excellent.